if you take an athlete, you give them a perfect training plan that's designed exactly to the specifications of their physiology and goals, but they don't believe in it. And you compare that to the same athlete who's handed a mediocre program, but they buy completely into it and they trust their coach, who performs better. I think that the one who believes in the program is always going to beat the person who has the perfect physiological plan.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Alex Ostberg today on the Running Effect podcast. Today, we are breaking down the last 4 editions of our newsletter, The Rundown by the Running Effect. These editions include deep insights on the science of tapering, the placebo effect, why you shouldn't copy professional runners and copy the winner, as Alex calls it, and so many other insights. I want to ask you guys a favor. You guys listen to the podcast. It's completely free. The newsletter is debatably better than the podcast. The insights that Alex takes to your inbox every Thursday morning, I think, are out of this world. I personally have been blessed by them. If you subscribe, it's completely free. And if you don't enjoy it, you can always unsubscribe the following week. I have left a link in the show notes to the past 4 editions that get discussed in today's conversation, as well as the general rundown link that you guys can hit the subscribe button to. I firmly believe that by subscribing and reading this newsletter, your running will be impacted positively as a result, starting from the moment you subscribe and start to consume the content. So do me a favor, take 5 seconds, scroll in the show notes, hit the subscribe button, and let me know your thoughts, your opinions on the rundown and how it has changed the way that you view your training, racing, and even everyday life. I am a firm believer in this project, which is why I brought it to life and I'm funding it. And I really want to see it have the impact that I know it can have. So not just subscribe to it, share with a friend, share it with your teammates, your team, your community. I would greatly appreciate it. Today's conversation, we break down some of the best insights from Alex over the last month, and I'm confident that these insights will also elevate you in a new way in this next month. If you enjoy this one, share it with a friend, give us a 5-star review, and hit the follow or subscribe button so you never miss another episode. Without further ado, enjoy the kind of monthly routine we go about at this point of distilling the best wisdom and insights from the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Alex Ostberg. Ladies and gentlemen, we are so back here to break down the last 4 editions of the Rundown by the Running Effect, or maybe at this point by the man, the myth, the legend, Alex Ostberg. Alex, welcome back to the podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
Thanks. It's always great to be on. I am back in Eugene, Oregon, as we prepare for the U.S. Championships coming up in about a week's time. And just, living life and trying to coach to the best of my ability so we can hopefully put some people on teams.
I love it. It's that time of year. I do want to make note. This is the first time you've been on the podcast since we passed 5 years, and you were that first guest. So I don't know what the words are. Congratulations, or thank you for putting up with me over 5 years and still doing these. And it's cool to now have kind of a monthly series with you and see what the podcast has transformed into off of that first episode. So, and how much deeper my voice has gotten over the last 5 years.
That, among other things, right. It's been fun to watch the full evolution, and to be a part of it at every stage of the journey has been an honor. And I look forward to, I think, bigger and better things that lie ahead.
I think the doubt. I appreciate it. No, I'm joking. I'm messing with you. What's one thing of the past 5 years that surprised you the most with the podcast?
I mean, truthfully, most of the time people set out on these kinds of creative projects, they fizzle out after probably a few months. I mean, you probably know the statistics better than I do. If you publish 20 podcasts, it probably puts you in the 75th to 80th percentile. And if you publish oh, is it 1? Okay.
21 podcasts, 90% of podcasts quit after 3 episodes, which says everything about society, by the way.
Right. Well, I think also you've made the intentional decision to turn this from what was a side hustle into a full-time gig. And I think your ambition has kind of scaled up with each phase of the company growing. And so I think you've very logically made progressions rather than launching something that was a moonshot. I think you started it small, you grew it appropriately, and now you're at the point where you've got people working for you. You've got 3 episodes coming out every single week, and there's no signs of this thing stopping. So it's a good time to buy stock in the Running Effect. Although I know it's not a public company.
Not yet. Well, I've been blessed by the wisdom of a man named Alex Ostberg, and I'm here to distill that knowledge and that wisdom to the listener here today in podcast format. So we're going to go through the last four editions of the rundown. It is linked in the description, everyone. And I know statistically, many of you listening to this right here, right now, are not subscribed. I have a promise. It's free to subscribe to. And if you don't like it, you literally take 30 seconds out of your day, you go on Substack and you unsubscribe. So you don't lose anything. Do me a favor, go subscribe and at least see if it will provide you some value and impact you, because I know it has done that for hundreds of people. So would greatly appreciate you doing that, as well as we're going to break down these insights today on the podcast, but we will obviously leave some parts of the newsletter out. So if you want to learn a little bit more in depth about the subjects discussed today, the editions themselves are really the full package here. The first edition I want to break down with you, it's titled Your Body Knows Best, Why Intuition Still Beats the Best Technology. I think in 2025 with AI and Garmin's and Apple Watch Ultras and Whoops and Oura Rings, why does the human body that's been around for quite some time, our old selves, still beat the best technology?
Yeah. So let me caveat this discussion by first saying that I am a techno optimist. I love being an optimizer myself. If there's any recovery tool or any tracking tool that exists on the market, I've probably tried it. I've been one of those guys in the past that's walked around with like a watch or a gadget on both wrists. So it's I'm willing to endure some embarrassment to see if I can get some good metrics. And now that I'm running a little bit less competitively myself today, I don't do it as much. But back in the days when I was in college and high school and a little bit post collegiately, I was tracking all of these things religiously. I was tracking my sleep. I was tracking my heart rate variability, how many hours I slept, my mood. I even tracked my grip strength at one point. I mean, it's a bottomless pit of things that you can look at. And I kind of, there was this promise that existed out there on the horizon, which was if you can get all these metrics and synthesize them into some kind of dashboard, I could wake up every morning and answer a few simple questions. How do I feel? Am I ready to train today? Am I adapting to the training? And how fit am I? Or also like how close am I to injury? And no matter how many different ways I sliced it, I could never really get those metrics to line up like the way I wanted them to. I found a lot of times they ended up just feeling a lot like a random number generator. And there were some days where I woke up feeling great and my, proprietary recovery score from whatever device I was using was like down the drain. And there were some days I woke up feeling terrible and it was like, you're great. And I'm like, something's not adding up here. There's a gap that needs to be addressed. And so I think where a lot of people get misled is that the allure of wearables is that we can gamify recovery in a way to make it really simple and really actionable. But I think there's a disconnect between what we can measure and what actually matters. There's a little bit of overlap there. I think wearables these days are pretty good at, time, obviously, duration, pace, heart rate, although wrist-based heart rate's a little bit finicky. Chest strap's usually better. HRV's pretty good. Total sleep time's pretty good. But when you get to these like more intangible metrics, like mood, like muscle soreness, for instance, like energy levels, a wearable just can't capture those metrics. And I think those metrics have an outsized influence on the decision making that you should be applying to your training. And so it's really my frustration in writing this piece. The impetus for writing this piece was my frustration between the disconnect of what wearables were promising and them really failing to live up to that expectation in my own mind. And there's a whole bunch of different rabbit holes we can go down, but that was really the premise of the piece.
One of the sections here, it's actually the final section, but I want to start there. No number knows your body than you do. I will frame this in a question. If I have a Whoop, I have a workout tomorrow. I wake up, I'm in the red, but I feel fine. Should I do the workout?
Right. The one thing you have to do is every number needs to be put in a larger context. I write in this piece here that the best use of wearables isn't to replace your intuition. It's really to refine it. And I think that if you have a disconnect between what the objective measures are saying, right? So what your wearable device is saying and what your intuition, what your subjective intuition is saying, you probably need to investigate why. Jeff Bezos, former CEO of Amazon, was famous for saying that when the anecdotes and the data disagree, the anecdotes are usually right. And in this case, I'll just replace the words a little bit and say that in training, I'd say you have to trust your lived experience more than a number. That's the one challenge is with these devices is if you wake up and you see you're in the red, it could be a clue, but it's probably not the final answer. And I think that when we outsource all of our decision making to a device, we start anesthetizing ourselves to like our own intuition and like interpreting our body's own signals. And I think that's a really, really dangerous trap to fall into.
One area that I feel like I've grown in the past few years, I religiously loved my sleep back in the day, and I still do to an extent. I think I've always struggled with some energy issues, and so naturally I gravitate towards that, type A, 8 hours of sleep. But I think it was almost a limiting factor where it was so much in my head that if I had a rough night of sleep, I immediately made it affect the rest of my day, my work, my school, my workouts. And I think as time has gone on, I've honestly been put in situations of work trips where I've like had to get 4 hours of sleep because of an early morning flight after being up late the night before for work, and gets 2 p.m. that day and I'm like tired, but I'm fine. Like I got done what I need to get done. It reminds me of the quote from Alex Hormozy that I've shared on the podcast before. America was built on the backs of men who smoked cigarettes, drove without seatbelts, and had bacon for breakfast. If you miss your biohacking routine this morning, you're going to be okay. How it relates to what I'm thinking about here is sometimes there is strength in seeing a number or seeing your body battery, if you have a Garmin, be at like 10 and being like, I'm still going to try to execute the workout today. And maybe I didn't sleep that well last night, or maybe I had a exam at Stanford, but I'm still going to do what Milt is telling me to do at practice today. I'll give it a shot.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing you have to take into consideration too is that if you're writing your own training plan and you're essentially going to use like HRV to guide your decision making, fine, like you can go down that path. But a lot of people are being coached by, by individuals who are not necessarily integrating what their wearable is saying about their body. And so if your coach, first of all, you should have a really good feedback loop with your coach. If you're feeling sick or you're feeling under the weather, or your Achilles is sore, you should obviously be saying that. But if your coach isn't really going to take into consideration what your HRV is or what your sleep is, then the metric is totally superfluous to begin with, right? It doesn't really add any value because it's just numbers for the sake of numbers, and it's really really hard to separate the signal from the noise there. So I think that wearables inherently are not bad things. Like I said, they can be used to refine your intuition. They shouldn't replace it. But I think if you're going to use a wearable, you should ask yourself three questions. Number one, does it actually track something that influences health or performance? I think in this arms race to become the top wearable device, they keep adding more and more metrics to the software. And more metrics don't necessarily imply that the device is any better because some of those metrics are totally meaningless. Like, for instance, tracking resting heart rate is like a pretty time tested method for like figuring out, hey, how is your body recovering? There's a little bit of noise in that measurement, but like I don't know. There's probably a more arbitrary metric than I could think of, but like step count for a runner, if you're already logging structured mileage, like doesn't really add that much value. It's incremental at best. The second question you should ask is like, and this is probably the most important one in my mind: is it actionable? Is the output actually going to change what I do? If you're meticulously gathering this data, but it's never actually changing what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, I think those numbers are more likely to cause more stress than they are a benefit. So you have to take that into consideration. And then the last thing is, does it tell you something that you don't already know or you could just feel, right? Like there's one thing, if your HRV is dropping simultaneously or in conjunction with your throat getting scratchy or sore, yeah, that's actually like that. Those are two metrics that are now aligning, pointing in one direction to say, hey, maybe you're coming down with a little virus or you're coming down with a little infection. But like being told that you drained your body battery and that your recovery time is 72 hours after a brutally hard interval session, yeah, I mean, you knew that already, right? Like that's not telling you anything novel or non obvious. So I think if your wearable can pass those three filters and you still find value in it, great. By all means, use it and use it religiously if you want to.
After some of these adventures I go on of not training and then running a marathon on no training, I'm so ready for it just to be like recovery time. Like you're nearing the end, like go to the hospital. I think my record's like in high 70s. I think I've gotten up to like 78 hours of recovery time, which is quite funny. But I even feel like in high school, as you were saying, like, yeah, even after I'd have a hard session, maybe I'd feel fine the next day, would just say things that were inaccurate. Do you think that these wearable devices, let's say outside of pace, because I actually think that's a very valuable one, do
Yeah.
you think they have a net positive or a net negative overall?
um, it probably depends on the type of runner that you're giving it to. I think most runners skew towards the side of the distribution where they're really neurotic, and are obsessed with numbers to begin with. And I think a lot of times when you start layering more data on top of those, like the interpretation of what those athletes are looking at, like sometimes that can actually be more harmful. Um, I just think the biggest thing is if you don't understand your own body, like, and you're not asking specific questions that the wearable's helping you guide, like helping guide you with, then it's not really providing any value. Like there's a quote from Seneca that I wrote in this piece, which is that if you don't know what port you're sailing towards, no wind is favorable, right? So like if you're just aimlessly training without testing hypotheses or like trying things out and looking at like input to output relationship, it's not really providing about any value. So I'd say it's probably slightly positive because I think there are valuable metrics, and I think most runners pay attention to the most valuable metrics. But most people could probably get away with just a Timex Ironman, which is what I used to have in high school, maybe with just pace and heart rate, and like all the other fancy things that are added to the watches these days. I think are providing a very, very marginal benefit. The other thing that I'll say too is that in reference to knowing your own body, um, I quoted a guy named William Sands, who's a kind of an expert on overtraining, and he said all recovered athletes are the same, but each unrecovered athlete is unrecovered in his or her own way. And so the recovery response to stress and exercise, whether that be physiological, psychological, or musculoskeletal, like no wearable can capture that nuance, and no wearable knows what your vulnerability is. If you're someone who is training and getting 4 hours of sleep per night, like your vulnerabilities are very different than an elite athlete who's sleeping 10 hours per night and is getting daily work from a PT and massage therapist. And so again, context is king, and I feel like we filter that out and we subordinate our decision making to technology. And I think a lot of times that dulls our instincts from both a coaching and an athlete perspective.
Now that we've lost any chance at ever getting sponsored by Whoop on this podcast, we can move on to the next edition. I'll also link each of these editions individually in the show notes if you want to read a specific one. Next one, you wrote July 3rd, 2025. Don't copy the winner. Training lessons from survivorship bias, regression to the mean, and trusting yourself. I think this one, I don't know. Picking a favorite newsletter is like picking a favorite kid. But this one might be my favorite just in terms of something that I actively struggled with. I think I texted you this when you had wrote it. One of the lines you said, I'd come back from practice, open my laptop, and eagerly check FlowTrack's Workout Wednesday. You were referencing yourself in high school. That was me in middle school. And I remember as a seventh grader trying to emulate and replicate some of these Workout Wednesdays because I didn't have a coach and I was just trying to train and do something hard and have fun. The problem was rarely was it like, do this at this mile pace. I was just watching pros rip 400s and 57, and I didn't really know how that related to me. So I thought this one was funny. And I also think I have a lot of kids DM me and just want to know what the best of the best are doing. And it's like, you should be so much less concerned with what Grant Fisher is doing and more about like, are you actually consistently running and running enough mileage and all of that? So the floor is yours. Why should we not copy the winner?
Yeah, I think there's several issues we have to break down here, and if you read the article, you'll notice that Dominic and I both had a shared a liking and affinity for like looking at what the elites were doing, and I think it's gotten more pervasive since then, right? Like there's YouTube channels that are uploading videos almost daily from people at the top, and I don't think that's a bad thing, to be clear. Like I think that at the end of the day, we're trying to grow our sport, and the more we can bring in a wider audience, the better. Specifically on that issue, though, one of the problems is that when you look at elite athletes doing workouts, it's such a sliver of the full picture. It's really just capturing the highlight reel essentially and not looking at all the work that enabled them to do that. Of course, if you're going to film something, it's way better to go capture like the big sexy workout where they knock out crazy splits. But I can tell you that like as someone who coaches pros who are able to do workouts like that, the majority of the work, the foundational elements that prepare them to do things like that are not that exciting. they're pretty monotonous and often very unremarkable. So if you assume that every workout needs to be like that, or every workout should be like an all out, puking your guts out type of effort, you're very easily misled. I think that I joked in the piece that every one of those videos should come with a warning label, which is don't copy what you don't fully understand. Um, the second thing, and then we can kind of bring it back, bring the conversation back to you. But I think that the one challenge with this as well is this concept of survivorship bias, which is this psychological tendency we have to only remember the winners and not the many others who failed using the same approach. And I tell this story from World War II, where the US military was looking at their fighter jets that were coming back from battle, and they were analyzing the patterns of where the bullet holes were in the planes. And there's a nice graphic, you should pull up the newsletter to look at it. They were all over the wings, a little bit on the tail. And they were like, great, we need to reinforce these areas of the plane just so that we could protect them even further. And then there was a statistician that came around. His name was Abraham Wald. And he said, hold on a second. You guys are just looking at the planes that made it back. What about the planes that got shot down and didn't make it? The missing data actually revealed a much more important lesson, which was the planes that didn't make it back really showed the true vulnerability. And so these planes had, and they were getting hit in the cockpit and they were getting hit right near the engines. And so those were the areas that actually needed to be reinforced. But what we did is we looked at all the people who made it back and we failed to realize that, we selected out the losers from the story and assumed that the winners were doing everything right. And so the same thing really happens in running. We see professionals or people at the top, people who get airtime on, the major TV networks during the Olympic trials or US championships. And we just assume that like everything that they're doing is the right way to do things. But sometimes they succeed despite those factors, not because of them. Maybe they're the one plane that made it back and there's carnage behind them. Like 99 other people tried that strategy and didn't make it. So I think if you're going to draw firm conclusions to associate what inputs lead to successful outputs, you can't only pull from a sample of winners. You need to make sure that the things those winners are doing are categorically distinct from what the people who failed are doing. And oftentimes I think we don't do that.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, although it does kind of relate to the section elite results are enabled by elite routines. If we are going to copy the winners, let's not talk about workouts here or even training, but as a coach at, I guess you can't call it the Bowerman Track Club anymore, but no one's paying me. So I'll say
Nike, Nike Swoosh TC.
Yeah, whatever. I'm a traditionalist. I miss the Bowerman days. As a coach at Nike and coaching some of the best athletes in the world, not just in the country, what are the things that those pro athletes are doing who will make teams, are doing on a daily basis that people should copy? Yeah. And you can get vague. You don't have to say 10 hours of sleep, but solid sleep routine, however you want to take it, the floor is yours.
Yeah. The way I wrote this is that professional runners live, and this is not necessarily realistic or feasible for everybody listening to this podcast, but if you want the answer, I'll give you the answer. I think professional runners live in a performance incubator. Every decision they make is filtered through the same question, which is this going to be beneficial for my bottom line, which is how fast am I going to run at the US championships? How fast am I going to run at the world championships when it matters? They treat their bodies like a temple, to steal a cliche phrase. They understand that hard work needs to be supported with really good recovery. They understand that, the way their bodies move, the way they eat, the way they sleep, the way they think are all going to factor into performance. And they recognize that life stressors or drama or whatever it is decreases your capacity to handle stress. And so I think those are the things that we should probably aspire towards. If you're an athlete that wants to get faster, yeah, you will have to run hard workouts, but that hard work needs to be supported by other things too. You need to support those elite results and those elite workouts with elite routines. And I think that's often the first thing that gets overlooked.
Final question for you on this edition. You end it with saying you are the experiment. At the end of the day, you are an N equals 1, a single case study. Your body, your life, your history, no one else has your exact variables. That's why copy-paste training rarely works.
Exactly. Again, I think we look to the top and we say, this is permanently going to be the solution for better training of all time. And ultimately, you need to ask yourself the question, not as what is the most that I can do, or what can I do this because this athlete did it. You should ask, can I do this because it's appropriate for me? Another big mistake I think people make is that in watching these videos and in watching interviews with coaches, there's so much attention placed on what they're doing, not necessarily the deeper question, which is far more important, which is, how, like, why are they doing it and how are they doing it? I think the what may look impressive, but the why really holds the wisdom. And so I think that you shouldn't be like searching for secrets in other people's training logs. It's maybe deriving general principles for them and then seeing how well you can understand how your own body is responding to training. And the last thing I'll say too is that training, in order to be effective, needs to be logical, it needs to be progressive, and it needs to be cohesive. If every year you're taking the new strategy from the top and trying to transplant that into your own life, I think that your results and your effort is going to be diluted across all the different strategies that you're trying. It's like there's that Bruce Lee quote, which is like, "I fear the man not who's practiced 1,000 punches, but the man who's practiced one punch 1,000 times." It's like, find the things that already work, commit to them wholeheartedly, and you're probably going to get a much bigger return on your investment than like constantly chasing the novel strategy. Because I think that we're so inclined to believe that the best workout or the best supplement or the best tactic is the thing we haven't tried yet. And I think we're drawn towards that novelty, but instead I think we should just look towards like time tested principles.
I lied last time. This one's definitely the best one. Not even just saying that. The placebo effect isn't a trick, it's a tool. What placebos reveal about the power of expectation in training and recovery. I say it's my favorite because I've always been fascinated by this. I was the type of annoying sibling who a sibling would get sick and I would say it's all in your head. If you believe it that you're not sick, you'll get healed. And then you'd go back and forth and the parent would chime in and be like, stop it. What is the placebo effect for those that don't know?
Yeah, we should level set by just talking about that first. So the placebo effect comes from medicine, but it's more broadly applicable. I'll just take an example to explain it. So anytime there's a drug that's in manufacturing, or it's in clinical trials, so they want to bring it to market, a lot of times they'll take a drug with active ingredients, right? They'll take something like, ibuprofen or something like that. And they'll say, okay, to test that this really works, we're going to give someone the active drug. And then we're going to give a control group a placebo. And the placebo is something that has no active ingredients. It should be physiologically inert, which basically means it should have no effect on the body. And a lot of times the placebo is just a sugar pill. Like that's literally all it is. And the problem that medicine always runs into is that when you blind participants to what they're taking, you have to tell them, hey, you're actually getting the active drug, even if they're getting placebo. And what happens is that they actually respond to the sugar pill, sometimes almost in proportion to, sometimes equal to, and sometimes greater than the actual active ingredient. And so the placebo effect has this very negative connotation in the medical world because we villainize it as something that we're always trying to beat. And the question, I like to flip that on its head and say, wait a second, like, rather than the placebo being a benchmark of something that we need to beat for effectiveness, can we appreciate the fact that we're giving a person essentially nothing, and their body is somehow mobilizing a response to an inert substance? Like, something is happening inside the body here, which is pretty remarkable. And we should study that, and we should understand how the body is actually like gathering those resources to produce a physiological effect. So that's the premise of the article. It doesn't have to just apply with medications. It can apply with surgeries. It can apply with sports science interventions. There's a whole host of different things that we can look at.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of this edition was just how many studies you referenced in here. I'll read this. Picture this: a group of elite cyclists line up for a series of 10-kilometer time trials, 6.21 miles if we're speaking in American. Before each effort, they're handed a capsule and told it's either a placebo or a caffeine supplement. Either it's a low dose or a high dose. In truth, every capsule is just a sugar pill. The results were astonishing. When cyclists believed they had ingested a high caffeine dose, their power output jumped by over 3%. When they thought they had taken a low dose, the gain was smaller, around 1%. And when told it was just a placebo, no improvement at all. Same legs, same lungs, same chemistry. Belief turned out to be as potent as any stimulant. My question for you is, most people out there listening today won't be in these sort of placebo type environments, as well as it's just they don't have people in their life unless you're going to hire someone to create these sort of situations and scenarios and setups where we're doing this thing that I just read with like giving each other, these miracle drugs that are just placebos. So how can people utilize and harness the power of the placebo effect?
Exactly. And to take a step back, I introduced this topic in the article by just saying that, like, at the end of the day, our expectations govern reality. Everything that comes across, that every stimulus that our body encounters in the world is actually pretty neutral until the body gives it meaning. And like typically our expectations in life, they act as a lens. Like either they amplify or they blunt the signals we receive. And the science and the studies I explain in this article make it abundantly clear that two people can encounter the exact same stimulus, right? Whether it's a workout you give them or it's a recovery protocol, whether it's pain they're dealing with, and they can walk away with totally different physiological outcomes based solely on what they believe will happen, or how a coach or a doctor actually frames the issue. And so this is actually the machinery behind how the placebo effect works. And so what I would say for the person in general is that belief is a very, very powerful thing. And I think belief in what you're doing and buy-in with what you're doing ultimately like filters the training response completely. There's a nice little graphic I put together towards the bottom of the article, which says that every neutral stimulus is filtered through your life context, your trust in who's giving you the plan, like your coach, and your belief in the program. And I think either that's going to lead to a positive physiological outcome or it's going to undermine it with a negative physiological outcome. And I think a lot of it comes down to the placebo effect is mediated by things like the relationship you have with your coach or your doctor, for instance. A doctor understands. There's a great quote that the art of medicine is gaining a patient's trust for long enough to let nature take its course, which is basically just saying like the body has an incredible innate capacity to heal, and you can augment that response by just gaining the patient's trust and helping them believe in a story. And so I think that the people that you believe in, the culture of the people around you, the rituals sometimes associated with what you're doing, all of these things can really turn the dial up on like how the interventions you're receiving are actually being perceived by your body. So I think the best coaches, the best doctors, the best teammates a lot of times know when to step in and how to harness that placebo effect to try to really bend biology in their favor.
My iPad just died, so I will have to walk out here in a second and get my phone. While I do, and you perform intermission for the people while I hop off the screen, the nocebo effect. I don't know if I knew about this, but it makes sense. Where there's positive, there's a negative. Tell that story, as crazy and dark as it is, because I feel like that one to me I hadn't heard before, and I was blown away by it.
Exactly. So for every good thing that exists in the world, there's probably an equal and opposite reaction that you can encounter. And so the nocebo effect is kind of like the flip side of everything that we've been talking about. The placebo is a positive effect that happens on the body, whereas the nocebo is when negative beliefs create real and measurable harm. And so there was this case study published in a medical journal, and I'm sure there's others. This is just one that I found. It was a 26-year-old guy who was enrolled in a drug trial for an antidepressant drug, where unfortunately he swallowed like I think 29 pills in a suicide attempt and started having all of these symptoms that would be indicative of an overdose. He was, had a racing heart rate. His respiration rate was through the roof. And this was actually confirmed when he went into the emergency department on the monitors. And so they started treating him for the presumed cause of his sickness, which was a medication overdose. And then there was one doctor who knew or found out that he was enrolled in this clinical trial, called the study director and said, "Hey, can you tell us a little bit more information about the drug that you're testing?" And they checked their records and they're like, "Wait a second, this guy's in the placebo group. Like they were sugar pills." And when they realized that, I'm sure everybody, took a deep breath, a sigh of relief, and they told the patient, and within 15 minutes, his symptoms basically went away. And I think it just goes to show that, like, again, like this physical stimulus or something that you take, like it can either sharpen you or it can undermine your performance. And how we frame things matters so much. And I think coaches ought to be very mindful of the language they're using around things. I think teammates ought to be very mindful of the language they're using around people, because these expectations really shape reality.
Anything else? Any final notes on the placebo effect for those listening?
I'll just one more quote that I love. If anyone hasn't already, should get a National Geographic subscription and watch the Breaking Two documentary that was put together. Probably was in 2018, 2019. And there's a guy that I've come to know named Brett Kirby. He's a Nike sports scientist, brilliant guy. And he was interviewed in that. And he said when he was talking about Elliot's chances of breaking 2 hours in the marathon the first time they tried, he says, I have all the physiology numbers, all the data on wind resistance and shoe quantification, but I have a big blank box for how do you quantify the mind? How do you measure a person's ability to push beyond what we thought possible based on physiology alone? Which I just think is such an eloquent way of describing, hey, we could try to, boil down performance to a biochemistry or a math equation. But at the end of the day, like, what's going to get Elliot across that finish line is not a performance variable. It's his belief in the system. It's how much he buys into what he's doing. It's how much he has a very an incredibly strong relationship with his coach, Patrick Sang. Like, all of these things on paper are hard to quantify. You can't put a number behind them, but they're really what formed the foundation for like elite performance, and ultimately probably contributed to him being able to break that historic barrier in Vienna a couple years later.
In short, because I don't want to abuse our time on this one, but it's a common theme in our episodes and my conversations with college coaches, professional coaches. Can you quantify the impact of trusting in your coach? Is there any metric of percent or time? Because the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, I feel like a coach would have a 1330 guy over like a 1310 guy if the 1330 guy comes in and believes in what the coach is doing rather than questioning it.
I can't quantify it, but I think it's 100% a factor. I often ask myself this question, like, if you take an athlete, you give them a perfect training plan that's designed exactly to the specifications of their physiology and goals, but they don't believe in it. And you compare that to the same athlete who's handed a mediocre program, but they buy completely into it and they trust their coach, who performs better. I think that the one who believes in the program is always going to beat the person who has the perfect physiological plan. And I think X's and O's are important, but at the end of the day, like, good coaches are not just encyclopedias of human physiology. They have to be relationship builders, and they have to know how to work with people who are unique. And, everyone has, different levers to pull, different buttons to press, and you have to figure that out. That's the challenge of it.
Speaking of those X's and O's, I think one of the biggest ones is tapering for athletes. Final edition we'll cover here today before wrapping up: how to stop sabotaging your taper, 5 lessons on trusting your training and peaking when it matters most. That title kind of indicates how to stop sabotaging your taper that many or most people do. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. I had a running joke with one of my college teammates that every runner loves to be 6 weeks out from their goal race, because their fitness is always a rough draft. It's never a final product. There's always more that they can give. You can always get sharper. You can always get fitter. Even if you just ran the best race of your life, you're always inclined to believe that you have more on the horizon. And so 6 weeks is this perfectly convenient time frame where you can get fitter. You can fit in 4 or 5 long runs. You can fit in this amount of hard workouts, and the pre-race anxiety hasn't yet taken hold. But inevitably, what always happens is you have this dream that collides with reality when you have the race is getting closer, the clock keeps ticking, and something happens. Life gets in the way. A key workout goes kind of sideways, and ultimately, you start feeling this scarcity. And typically, it's always in the last 10 to 14 days where you're like, I should have squeezed in more work. I want to be fitter than I already am. And this is where people always make the same mistake, which is the instinct is to double down and to cram in more work. And it's to try to prove their fitness rather than letting it build organically. And I think runners are naturally insecure people about their fitness to begin with. So they're just always trying to add a little more fuel to the fire and always prove to themselves, oh no, my fitness is actually there. They never actually have that deep trusting belief. They always want to see it and validate it. And they're always willing to make the trade. I will take tired legs today for more fitness to tomorrow. And the problem is when you get to a taper, that strategy is not fit for purpose. At some point in time, you have to actually be willing to back off and have the courage to rest a little bit more, because delayed gratification, that mindset that runners are so good at, it's like, again, I'll take fatigue today for better performance tomorrow. That delayed gratification in the extreme results in no gratification at all, right? That mindset never actually lets you arrive at tomorrow. It's like saving for years, but you never actually cash the check. And so the reality is, and it's kind of a sobering reality, you're never going to feel totally ready. You're always going to feel like there could have been more work to do. And that's just the inevitable curse of our sport. You have to learn how to back off and be content with the fact that the work has been done. And now I'm just going to soak in this fitness and capitalize on it and fully express it. And the best way to do that is to taper properly. But there's so many things that get in the way.
We'll talk about eating marshmallows here in a second, but I think 3 questions that you posed that I really love. You said, and this was in the section, learn to trust yourself for the right reasons. You asked 3 questions. Am I afraid to rest because I think I'll lose everything I've worked for? Am I comparing myself to others who might be doing more? And I think this third one is my favorite. Have I started to love the grind of training rather than the competitive arena of racing?
Yeah. I think that, again, we're so good at grit and hard work as runners. And at some point in time, you need to actually like interrogate some of the insecurities that keep popping up in your head and actually figure out like, hey, can I actually get to the root cause of this issue and figure out, is this really something I need to be concerned about? Or is this just my mind getting busy? And I think these questions really try to answer that. The first is, am I afraid to rest because I think I'll lose everything I've worked for? Not really a rational or logical thought. But I recognize that humans are not really rational or logical, typically when there's emotions involved. But if you think about the science of training and adaptation, the only work that you benefit from is the work that you can recover from. And so as this just came out today, so today is July 24th, there's an episode or a newsletter that just came out today talking about the science of tapering, which basically says that it's a relationship between fitness and fatigue. And after a workout, you gain more fitness, but you also have a lot more fatigue. And the fatigue dissipates a lot faster than the fitness lingers. So fitness is durable, fatigue is transient. You basically want to get to the point where you have dissipated the fatigue, but you still have good fitness. And a lot of times people don't realize is like that can take 10 to 14 days to fully recover from what you've done. But like this insecurity is always pushing us to do a little more. So the second thing is, am I comparing myself to others who might be doing more? Again, based on the conversation we just had about not copying the winner, same logic applies. The secrets aren't hidden in other people's logs. It's about understanding how well you respond to your own training. And it's about how well you can apply, training to your own unique circumstances. Like let other people, let their insecurities run their training. You want to show up to the line feeling fit and fresh, not fit and fatigued. And I would venture to guess that a lot of people show up fit and fatigued. And then the last one is, this is something that I kind of stole from Coach Milt. Have I started to love the grind of training more than
that's this whole podcast? Come on.
Have I loved? Yeah, exactly.
Milt, Hormozy. We've got a list of 5 people.
I know. So I think a lot of people.
He must, by the way, he must just grin weekly on this podcast while he's going on his early morning treadmill run. He's probably just waiting for the shout out every single time, whether it's you or someone else.
No, I know. I don't know where weekly I would be without him.
For him.
Yeah. So have I started to love the grind of training more than the competitive arena of racing? I think this sport is interesting because unlike things like soccer, football, tennis, where like competition always is the pinnacle of what you do, we spend so much time training. Like it's like you got to love training to some extent because it's like 95+% of what you do. And the racing starts to become a smaller and smaller proportion of your craft. And I think a lot of times we sometimes forget that like we get addicted to the chase of gaining fitness more so than the ability to just go out there and compete and try to beat people. And you can't forget why you're training. You can't forget what the larger purpose is, which is that we train to reap the rewards of our labor in the races, and the thrill of gaining fitness should not exceed the thrill of racing. So I think it's important to have an honest conversation with yourself about that and just say like, where am I on that spectrum?
Do you find that We a lot of times talk about like pre-race nerves or whatever and how it doesn't change over time. Are you surprised to the extent of how many college teams or professional runners also struggle with these concepts when it comes around to tapering? Or would you say they're generally a little more in check?
These things apply to people at all levels of the sport. I think, again, it's not that people at the top don't have fears and anxieties. Usually, they've gotten there because they've learned how to manage those feelings a little bit more effectively. So just because you might be susceptible to some of these questions doesn't mean that you're at a disadvantage. It's, can you have a calm and hopefully somewhat rational conversation with yourself about how to manage it?
I mentioned we talked about eating marshmallows. The listeners probably confused who didn't read the newsletter. Do you want to take us through this study as the final wrap up point?
Yeah, there was a study done in the 1960s by a guy named Walter Mischel. He was looking at children and their ability to delay gratification, and the premise of the study was extremely simple. They brought a young child into a room, and they said, "Hey, here's a marshmallow. You can eat it now, or you can wait 15 minutes and get two." And what kid wouldn't want two marshmallows? Really, the question is, how long can they actually delay and resist the temptation, delay their gratification in order to get double the reward. And there were kids who were able to delay their gratification, and others who just had to eat the marshmallow and couldn't resist it. And they then took those people, sorted into those two groups, and they said, okay, what does this mean for like outcomes in life, like better relationships, better jobs, higher GPAs, so on and so forth. And they found that those who were able to wait 15 minutes for double the reward were scored way higher on a lot of those metrics. Now, parts of this study have been challenged in recent years in what's been considered the replication crisis in psychology. However, I think that the premise of the study still rings true, which is that the ability to resist immediate pleasure is a superpower, and runners are really, really good at that because we're really good at just putting our heads down, grinding, and then waiting for the rewards to emerge. But like any superpower or any strength, it can become a weakness if taken too far. I'm going to read a great quote from a guy named Oliver Berkman who wrote a book called Meditations for Mortals. He said, it seems clear, and he was referencing this study, it seems clear that the self-discipline not to grab the first marshmallow is an invaluable trait for what's commonly thought of as a successful life. On the other hand, there's no virtue in accumulating the greatest number of uneaten marshmallows that would be delicious were you to ever let yourself consume one. At some point, in order to experience the benefits of having received any in the first place, you're going to have to eat a damn marshmallow. And so I just thought it was such a blunt um, truth, which is that we get so good at rewarding postponing rewards in running. Like, let's do more work, let's do another hard workout. We just start valuing the work we might do tomorrow more than the work we've already done, and a mile in the bank feels like it's worth half as much as a mile that's out there on the horizon. But at some point, like, again, you have to cash in the check. The point isn't to keep accumulating. You have to be able to know when to pivot and to switch the strategy from delayed gratification to, I'm going to get the most out of myself right now. And what do I need to do that? I need to rest and back off a little bit.
Alex, excellent work recapping these 4 articles. I do not pay you, followers, to do this, but I'm on my phone and I see an email as we're wrapping this up 2 minutes ago because I wanted to read something. But 2 minutes ago, come on, timing, this is crazy. New comment, 5:28. It's 5:30. Okay, I didn't plan this. Ready? Quote, what an incredible article, Alex. The information I gleaned from you with all your articles is par none. Keep at it. Guys, if you are 45 minutes into this podcast and you haven't subscribed, I don't know what you're doing, quite frankly. You guys probably subscribe to like DoorDash offers. So if you can keep up with those in your email inbox, what's the harm? What's the foul? And having one of these weekly in your inbox. And we're honest with the people. I think our dashboard is like, if we turned on like paid subscribers, I think we'd be up to close to $1,000 per year. So guys, the least you can do to repay Alex, the man who worked so hard to put these articles out. We are restricting him from this $1,000. The marshmallow, his version of the marshmallow, is subscribe, share it with a friend, pass this on if it has been valuable to you. Greatly appreciate you passing it on. And again, subscribe. If you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. Alex, you have the final word. You can close us out here. Appreciate your time today.
No, thank you. I gave this some thought because I know you always like to ask these kind of concluding take home questions. And I think when we look at these 4 articles, we came back to essential tension every time, which is that the allure of external validation, we looked at the allure of external validation versus the necessity of kind of internal clarity and individualized decision making. And I think a lot of times we're susceptible to just opting for the default because it's what everybody else does, whether that's overtraining during the taper, whether it's blindly trusting metrics and not necessarily looking at your intuition, or it's mimicking elite athletes and not looking at your own training as an N of one. And so the biggest thing that I'll say is, yeah, as a take home message, always choose a strategy that's fit for purpose based on your goals and your intentions. And I think that mastery in running comes from choosing what to ignore just as much as choosing what to pursue. So that's my take home message. Appreciate the kind words. I'm glad somebody commented right in time for this episode to end. If I was writing for an audience of 10, I would still do it. I'm not doing it for the attention. But it's been a really fun project for me, and I hope the audience is getting value out of it.
I'll see you 4 more from now. Appreciate you, man.